Source America elevates what it means to buy products and services. Your contract creates jobs for people with disabilities right here in the U.S. At Source America, you can look forward to exceptional customer service grounded in contract expertise and specific industry knowledge. You'll get the products and services you need when you need them at a competitive price. Source America offers business solutions you'll feel good about. Learn more at sourceamerica.org. Source America is an authorized Ability One enterprise.
Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Welcome to a brand new episode of AudioGyan Case Study. Today I have Srinath Rangamani with us on AudioGyan, currently Head of Design at Swiggy and previously at Myntra, StoreMate and Adobe. He's a digital designer with over 10 years of experience in creative interaction and product design for mobile, app and web. His philosophy is create something pure. For his beauty, simplicity, craftiness and care lies the experience of user. And today we are here to take an in-depth look into how Swiggy's design system works, design team works, and what goes behind the scene in this food delivery startup based in Bangalore. So thank you, Srinath, for giving us your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on AudioGyan.
Thank you, Kedar. The pleasure is mine.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, this is a special episode called AudioGyan Case Study, where I generally discuss, go deeper into one problem statement or one case study or one campaign, solution, product and things like that. So today is obviously Swiggy, and I've come up with around 5 to 6 questions, and let's see how do we...
Absolutely. Sounds fun.
Yeah. So I'll start off with the most, what I can say, like a smaller question that everyone in this online designer community speak about, the small discount icon, which rotates and captures the attention while you scroll on the homepage or the listing page. And typically discount has been like used over and over again everywhere, right? But you actually use the medium to change the frequency at which it scrolls depending on the speed, how you swipe. So how did you create this delightful interaction?
Sure. If I could go back in time a bit, this was almost a year ago when we were redesigning the app, and we noticed a very interesting change in the consumer behavior. Now, at that point in time, we didn't have as much discounts as what we have today. Swiggy wasn't known for discounts, right? And of course, there were other players coming into the market who were just bringing in discounts. And we also, when we introduced discounts, we also saw this change in the consumer behavior. There was a clear trend that consumers were getting influenced towards some of these discounts. We could attribute some of these orders towards them. And it's completely understandable because discounts are a great way to drive affordability for consumers, right? And it's actually pure value creation, for consumers. So, and what we also observed is it improves retention, repeat rates, and stickiness of those consumers who used it. So that's a clear consumer behavior change, right, that you can attribute to. Now, the challenge that we had is, so we had very little discounts and we had moved to a lot of discounts. Very few consumers could actually find them, right? So as you can imagine, there are some obvious solutions, right? So, there's an offers destination that we could create for consumers where, users can go and discover these things. But that's just one part of the problem. Because consumers' journey doesn't necessarily start with discounts as top of mind, right? So consumers still like to browse listings, see restaurants, see the cuisines that they like, and take a decision somewhere. So when we dive deeper, we could figure out that there are 2 parts to this decision-making process. One part is very conscious, right? When it comes to, factors like speed of delivery, right? Cuisine that they would like to eat. Or ratings of that restaurant, right, which signifies quality for. So these are obvious things where consumers were looking at it in a very conscious way. And then there are subconscious one, right? And to our surprise, like even pictures, right, that like thumbnail images, those are some decision factors as well, right? And discount falls into that subconscious thing as well. So there are just 2 parts to this decision process, and it was quite clear that we had to create something for the subconscious part of the consumer choice. So coming to the solutioning part, right? We designed many visual solutions to this problem, but all of them kind of introduced clutter and breaks in the natural scrolling behavior that users have. And so, it got pretty messed up because this is not a conscious choice for consumers, right? So most consumers start their journey hungry also. So we know that more breaks we introduce in the decision process, that's going to have a compounding effect on the order itself.
Correct.
So what we wanted was a very calm and considered solution to this problem. So we thought, instead of going visual, why don't we go with motion, right? We were inspired by a couple of great examples around the world, right? One was basically, what MacBook used to do. When you actually close your MacBook, there's a slight pulsating light that goes in, right? In a very ergonomic way. It's very much equal to how your heart beats, right? It silently tells you that, everything is all right. I'm backing it up, and I will sleep in some time, right? That's one. Or and the second one that we got hugely influenced by was like the traffic signal. Like in the night, if you're driving, you can be going at a good speed, right? Because there's no traffic. But then there's this pulsating yellow light, right? Which is telling you that you can keep going, right? Subconsciously asking you to just be a bit more aware of things, right? So we were inspired by some of these things, and we wanted to create something like this. And both of these are subconscious things, right? That works on your mind. So that's why we thought, so our inspiration to do this was to create a motion which is calling out for attention, but only to your subconscious mind, and as you're scrolling through in a natural behavior, and it sort of is fun, right? Because when you're actually scrolling, the speed of the scroll actually influences the speed at which this thing rotates, right? So it's actually fun, but you rarely notice it, right? And when you notice it, it kind of delights you.
Correct.
So it's subtle in that way.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I like the example which you gave of the MacBook doing this thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, quite insightful. So now coming back to the bigger questions. This was just to build the curiosity of how the interaction is going to be, right? So I would start with slightly a broader question, like how big is the team, and understand what happens in the team. So the first one is geared towards that, and we discussed during Design Up conference that you have some design sprints before. So how does this overall thing work in the design team as such?
Sure. We are a team of 16 now and growing. So we are highly bunch of passionate designers, researchers, illustrators, and storytellers, so to say, who are super obsessed in creating great consumer experiences. So we design a suite of products for consumers, that is the consumer app and the web. Second one is for the supply. What we call supply is basically the vendors who are basically taking orders, and owners of those restaurants who are basically looking at analytics of their restaurants, learning from consumer behaviors, and leveraging the platform. And the third set of products that we design for is for delivery, which is the driver app. So what we consciously do is to design all of these products with an equal measure of passion. We have the same amount of obsession and craft towards all of them. So that's something that we take some pride on. Now, design within Swiggy is a very deeply integrated org within the company. We get involved very early in the product discovery stage, as well as the conceptualization stage, and the final production as well. Our CEO, Harsha, truly believes in design, right? This is to a level that he actually browses Dribble every day, right? Wow. So that's great. A lot of inspiration actually comes from that. And we've seen him embrace a lot of design thinking in solving some challenges within the company, right? Be it product challenges, process challenges, or even people challenges. So there's actually, as we speak, there's some workshop going on for all of the leadership on design thinking. So that's how much deeply integrated design is within Swiggy. And so why it all comes from how much empathy you have, right? How much empathy is really the superpower here. And empathy is at the heart of everything that we do. And that's one thing that you can expect a Swiggy designer to bring to the table. So because we get very immersed very early into the product cycle, what it does is naturally we take the role of storytellers, right? Where we conceptualize, prototype, and validate some of these ideas to bring conviction in building excellent products. So this is why actually design starts a couple of months before even a product gets sort of prioritized and goes to the development stream. This is one of those important reasons. Now, this is great for some projects where you have clear OKRs defined and you have a clear roadmap, which mostly happens in consumer products, right? Like, when you're visioning something, pretty much like this is the roadmap that you're going to take, and it's all clearly defined for you. There are some streams of projects which are very different from these big bets that we do, which are highly experimental in nature. If you think about it, they have very low conviction, low clarity. So you have to build it over a period of time.
Okay.
And that new piece of information can come in any time, right? Like just probably a week before the dev sprint, where we say, okay, you know what, this is what we've learned from this. Like, this data is showing us something and there's something terribly wrong with this, or user research came up with something like this. So then we had to go back and iterate on those products. So these are very different from if you look at projects on the delivery side. Like we don't even have some context, all context about how these products work, right? In fact, the ops team has more context about some of these things.
Correct.
They run a lot of these experiments on the ground, and they have much more context because these experiments are pretty much cheap for them to run, right? Like, these are basically process experiments that they do or people experiments they do, which take time to basically learn, what behaviors have changed and then to productize it, right? So these projects are slightly different, where a designer's role is about like immersing themselves, leveraging those learnings and trying to figure out a best solution around it, right? Like, so there are different phases of projects within Swiggy. But yeah, because design is tightly integrated and we are almost at the top of the funnel for most of these ideas, we naturally start pretty early.
With WebOps, I think it's not more of a technical challenge. It's more about understanding the patterns and
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. So what is the process like to ensure consistency in your design? Because I've been using the app and also
Right.
the desktop. Everything looks like in synergy. It looks like one product. It looks, as opposed to a lot of other products who have probably higher traffic and higher I don't know traffic, but like lot more action into the product happening.
Absolutely.
So how does what is your process in the design team essentially, apart from having a design system, obviously?
Yes,
Yeah.
I wish I could say design system, but yeah, we are there, but not yet there, kind of, right? Like, so, but what we did was we have a fairly modular design framework, like, which works for global navigation, components, and all of the interaction design that we do, which we came up in the last redesign. It's pretty comprehensive and kind of highly repeatable, reusable across the product journeys, right? And so by keeping it simple, we've been able to achieve some level of design consistency as well. And not just that, right? Like in terms of design efficiencies, it's okay, but it's actually helpful in creating development efficiencies as well.
Correct.
Like some of the code is pretty much reusable, the components are pretty much the same. There are obvious benefits in the product development processes, right? But then if you look at it, there are consumer benefits as well. This is super important for a habit forming product like us, because once consumers learn behavior, right? Like, I think they form muscle memory with some of these products. Like you expect some of these things to stay in the same place, behave in the same way. Like, it's very predictable in nature, right? So you want to be able to leverage that consumer behavior that you have built, right? Like that muscle memory that you have built. So that said, we always debate about consistency versus coherence. This is because what happens is Swiggy is a highly dynamic product, whereas the shopping experience is very close to e-commerce. Most of the fulfillment is very dynamic in nature, where pattern is going to create some flow for the user in the shopping experience. Anti-pattern is going to create some kind of alert or whatever that is happening on the ground. So how we own the system, it actually depends on designer to designer. We have lead designers who are kind of architects in our team owning the overall navigation and framework. But we always keep ourselves plugged into new ideas, like experiments that other designers do in their projects. And we jam every month into figuring out which of this makes sense, right? Like which of them can go back into a toolkit of sorts. So that's this way. It actually gives all the designers an opportunity to own the framework, right? So you're not like fighting who's the boss. Like you're not policing this, right? Like it's co-ownership with all designers. And because you can contribute to the framework, you're naturally inclined to try new things and make it work and show some data that it actually work. But because it's so simple, right? Like we only accept simple solutions, right? And the bar for it to be successful is also pretty high.
It actually helps like a budding designer to be much more responsible while creating those components itself, because
Absolutely.
at some point it will go into the design system or into the repository of all the assets that you have. So it is like a responsibility in itself.
Absolutely. If you think about it, like most of the junior designers, it's kind of a learning unlearning phase for themselves, right? Like when you think about why is this so simple, why is it so undesigned, we said this is intentional, right? Like most of design is intuition, but it can be translated to some intent. We wanted it to be a certain way, and you can see obvious benefits. And once they see that benefit, like they get really into it. Like now, how do I use this for my own designs, right? Success is one part, but there are emotional aspects of the product, like what you talked about, right? Like it's a very cluttered world, and just clearing that clutter is so important, right? In sort of winning the user's trust.
But how did you come up with this overall strategy itself? Because I'm sure you must have joined as a so the product was already there in the market and you joined then later on.
Right.
So how did you build that culture of making components which are simple? How did you got those buy-ins also from other stakeholders?
Yeah, great question, right? Like, I think I came into a product where it was almost validated of sorts.
Correct.
But what it also helped was we had a certain ambition for ourselves, right? Like, we had to set the bar high in terms of what a product could be.
We as in you with the founders?
Yeah, we with the founders, right? Like, and we were thinking that for all the ambitious things that we had to do, we had to keep it simple. So this is one of the first principles that we established. But then, I think all things have to fall in line for this, right? Like what you talked about, buy-ins and all those things. It naturally happened because we were wanting a redesign. Everybody was like wanting a redesign. So there's a V 1.0 that is there. We are milking it, but let's just go and do a redesign. And that helped in aligning some of those ducks, right? Like, in a row, so to say. And when you actually show some idea which is like 10x better than what it is right now, people get naturally excited, right? The buy-in becomes simple because it's so obvious, right? Like, and it feels like, why didn't we do this before? I think there was this feeling and we were like, yeah, sure, this is the right. Of course, it took a lot of effort to convince people because it was already a successful lab that was running. But then when we showed the potential of where we could go and how highly efficient it could be and how it could scale, I think people got naturally excited. And redesign actually helped a little bit of some of this.
Really nice. In fact, I don't remember the old design at all now.
That's See, that's success.
And obviously the app feels very natural. I mean, it looks very natural in the sense it doesn't look designed. That's the biggest compliment to have, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you share some insights on how did that track your order? Because it's also quite spoken about feature overall. And I think it was launched very recently and it seems so natural because you have the GPS system and things in place. So how did that evolve? Because again, that is one feature which has been adopted by other competitors in the market soon after you guys did, as per my understanding at least.
Correct.
So how did that evolve, the track your order feature?
Yes, absolutely. This is one of those three important marketing things also that we use, right? Which is live order tracking is one of those features that you use Swiggy for. So there was some part of the track order experience that is after the redesign that existed before. But when we were doing the redesign, again, there were two parts to the Swiggy order experience that we actually thought, right? One is the pre-order experience where you're actually choosing what to buy and all those things. And then the post-order experience where it's getting fulfilled. Now, it's not very different from e-commerce, except that the pre-order experience is mostly in line with e-commerce where there is a storefront and there's a listing and there's a menu and checkout, right? Which is very seamless, right? And this is the flow which is very much, similar to e-commerce.
Correct.
The post-order part is where the complexity kicks in, right? Which is that, it's hyperlocal in nature and it's very much real-time like Ola or Uber where you actually see a driver coming in. There's some mental model which is established and it's solved there, right? Now, this is fairly complicated and a number of things actually happen simultaneously. in a Swiggy experience. Like when you place an order is received from our end, it is being relayed to the vendor. And then the vendor accepts an order and they start preparing it. While this is happening, we are finding out who the delivery guy is. Then he is getting assigned. And if that guy is not nearby, then somebody else is getting assigned. So there are state changes that are happening. But then the flow remains the same, which is when there's order received and then there's order confirmation and then food preparation and order pickup. So there is synchronous stages of this experience and then there are asynchronous parts of it. So we said what the problem was to create a post-order experience which communicates the state of the order, considering both the synchronous and the asynchronous parts of it, and the emotional aspects of the consumer as well, because they're already hungry when they place an order, right? And it's like a flow that is happening, right? So we said, how do we solve this in a way that could be seamless, right, for the user? So if you look at the track order screen, it's divided into two parts. The first half is pretty much very dynamic. It has a map. And it shows like, a delivery guy getting assigned and then he's moving and number of things are happening there. Those are the asynchronous parts of the experience. The synchronous parts is pretty much like, there's an order received and then there is, order is confirmed and, food is getting prepared and order is getting picked up. This seemed to be a better solution for consumers because it gave a very clear state of what is happening in the Swiggy system. And we were able to articulate it in a very clear and concise manner this way. Versus if you look at other apps, like, you could clearly see that there is 1, 2, 3, and then there is a progress bar going in, and where consumers won't visualize some of this information, right? It's very hard to connect the dots for the consumers.
So I remember this was done, I don't know, maybe 10 years back in Domino's app where they had 1, 2, 3, I think, yeah.
Yes. I think it so happens, right? I think product design industry itself tries to leverage on existing mental models, right? And so most of the order taking apps relied on the Domino's way of doing 1, 2, 1 through 3, where, it's not really that way sometimes. And so we leverage on the mental model of what Ola and Uber tried to do, right? Which is a lot more dynamic and it's transparent in nature and there's some delight in actually tracking it, right? Like every 5 minutes you just open and that guy coming closer to the door actually makes it a bit more delightful. And what it almost did was to completely take anxiety out of the way, right? So that way that solution worked pretty well for us.
Beautiful. I would tell the listeners they have missed one nice talk by Srinath in Design Up, which was much more almost similar what you spoke just now, but it was supported with visuals. So yeah, maybe next time when you have
I could share the slides. Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, zooming out a bit, I would like to know what are the biggest challenges for you in the design team especially, and how do you address it? I mean, how important do you think other stakeholders should be sensitive to other designers? You briefly touched upon it, but if you can slightly elaborate on how do you manage or communicate with the other stakeholders as to how this works or how important it is, because you may not expect the same level of empathy what a designer has from a web ops team guy or from a founders or from any other department of the business maybe.
Absolutely.
So how do you manage to communicate that, if you can give some insights?
Yeah, great question. So one of the top challenges for us, and I touched upon this topic in my design up this thing as well, is to keep our awareness on mobility all the time. Swiggy is a living, breathing product, right, in itself, which makes it a highly dynamic business of sorts. Every area of 3 to 4 kilometers, which we call serviceable zones for consumers, right, where there's a good supply and there's good, service by our delivery guys. So this is a serviceable zone. It's like a micro country in itself, with its own micro economies of scale happening. And so, but the UX, right, has to scale up or down based on this supply serviceability equations. So this is a highly dynamic challenge for first designers to understand and to build empathy towards stakeholders. That's the inward right way of looking at things, right? But then understanding these nuances is also a key part in collaborating, right? Because sometimes when a stakeholder is coming and telling you about serviceability and how it affects their life, and we tend to talk about ease of use and making it simple for consumers, but actually it's not so simple. There is some complexity, and you are in that room to solve that complexity for the consumers, right? So by having this context, right, deeper context about this problem space, you can interact better with stakeholders. And oftentimes within Swiggy, though, our stakeholders have too much context, and so they come up with things like, you know what, we thought about a solution. It is so obvious. We it can work. Sure, it can work, but clearly we have to see what you have to see. Like what clearly we have to see what they see, right? Like, and without that context, it would be very difficult for a designer to get into a solutioning space. Correct. Right? So one of my key roles is to make sure that my designer is aware of this, right, all the time. And so they are aligned to a set of key principles with which we design, and the product is generally designed. And then the other part of my role is to make sure that my stakeholders are always sensitized to some of these things, right? So getting designers early into a project, providing them with enough context because of the emotion that they get, right, and sensitize this process throughout the product building is one of the key roles for me as a design leader. So I think oftentimes what happens is like it's a combination of process, product, and people that is going to get it done, right? And articulating that, building that relationship with stakeholders and getting the trust back, right? That, hey, we know that you have good context, right? And we want to learn from you. But what about users, right? Why should we do this? Why should they care about it? Is a question that designers are expected to ask within Swiggy, right? That's the big challenge. And it's about communicating this not just across your org, but also above and below your org is very important as a design leader. So I think that that's a very important role that I play by having a seat at the table.
Very, very interesting. This is going to help me as well. Yeah. So I'll just rush through like a couple of questions and club them because just given the time. Yeah. So like, since you spoke about this very briefly in the first answer itself, where the offer thing is getting more and more overpowering in the economy itself,
Right.
in the Indian economy. So how do you deal with the pressure of making offers discoverable, if in especially in this highly competitive market? What is, like, this would be a brilliant question for all the designers. How do you say no to
Right.
certain things? Because you don't want there is this inherent drive from the marketing or the business team to saying that yes, we want to pump offers because people are looking for that.
Right.
While we come from a very utopian world that, hey, people will buy because Apple is getting sold irrespective of the price, right?
Absolutely.
So we come from this thought process that it's not about offer, it's about delivering that experience. So how do you say no to certain things within the
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are extremely consumer obsessed and happy to give whatever consumer wants, right? Be it discounts, coupons, offers, variable rewards, whatever it is. Now, discounts are not so bad. Like, if you think about it, every business is different, and discounts is probably a very important part of some of those businesses. Now, the way I would like to think about it is discounts equal to affordability, equal to value creation, equal to a successful product. That's how we think about it, right? And if you talk about the burn that comes out of discounts, some of it is necessary when you're scaling your business and trying to dominate a market, right? And a company and its people should be okay with it as long as that burn creates reversible consumer behavior, right? If it is not, then as a designer, I have an issue, right? Like, I have to say a no. But then no is such a meaningful thing to say, right? And it should be it should be at the right place at the right time. And rolling your eyes or shaking your head is not a good skill in saying that no. And no is also important because if you think that if you think about discounts, especially because we are talking about this issue, there is enough supply of discounts actually. Whether we fund it or our partners fund it, whatever it is. It is about matching that supply to the demand, right? Who wants these discounts? And if it's not doing that, right, then you're not setting yourself up for success and the company, right? So what is a good way to do it? I think that it's important to bring your views to the table. First, speaking up is important, right? And we have a value called, stand up, right? Disagree and comment, right? Like, so why stand up? Because it takes some courage to even speak up.
Correct.
to share your views, right? And that's very important part of it. So it is very important to bring your views to the table and share any data, whether it is consumer research or insights that you have from your past experiences, and stand your ground for a win-win, right? And a win both for consumers as well as business. Now that said, sometimes you have to trust people do the right thing, right? You may disagree, but you have to commit yourself to doing your 100% to the success of the project. Now, what is the middle ground? How can we find the middle ground? The good thing is modern product is all about is very iterative, right? The cost of rolling back is negligible. So finding the middle ground is about testing with a group of people, right? Learning from results and making informed decisions, right?
Correct, yeah.
And as long as you are aligned with everybody else on that, whether it is viable, whether it is scalable, whether it is delightful, all those conversations can come later. It is about just, if there's a disagreement, if you're saying a no, align the team on just trying out a little experiment and learn from it, and then probably think about scaling it further.
This is actually a nice segue to the second last question which I have is, so do you do A/B test while doing these experiments? Because it's first trying it out, right? So you open it, how does that A/B test part work, or does it even exist?
Yeah, we have a highly experimentative culture at Swiggy. We have a stream of projects always where there is experiments going on. And one of the experiments that I would like to cite is, we had a certain hypothesis about brands. And we had some open filters, right? Visual
Brands
filters.
like McDonald's and
everything, right? So they drive most of the thing, right? And we had made a certain UI choices where we were just using imagery of those brands. But as it happens with brands, the recall value is very less with imagery, right? It happens with logos. We've never used logos before in our product. So we were so hesitant about some of these things, right? And we said where we have shown images of food, and one of our design principles is food first. And then you suddenly start showing logo. We were not really sure how this could go with consumers. So one of the A/B tests that we did was to create one of those components, right, using logos of these brands. Now, some of the brands have a high recall value. Like if you talk about it, McD's of the world or Domino's of the world. But then some of them like Meghna Biryani, you know it for the flavor and the taste of it, right? Not necessarily
because of the
logo. So this is why we weren't really sure which way to go. And this is a good candidate for A/B test also, right?
Correct.
And design was really saying that no, it may not happen. Product was saying that it may happen. Eventually, we saw consumer behavior change, right? And people actually, apart from just impressions on that component, there were actually conversions happening through that component. So this is one of those tests which really concluded that yes, you have to rapidly test, iterate, but this is just one experiment that got succeeded. There are 9 other things that fail. We did a number of experiments on delivery fees and making it 10, making it 20, making it 0, and all those things, right? So number of experiments keep failing, but we keep learning and then take the best foot forward.
Correct. I should have kept this as 2-part episode. There's so much to learn. But yeah, concluding with one last question, does Swiggy as a company treat themselves as a product or a service? This is why, because at least when I was working in ClearTrip, we used to purely look at it as a product. And obviously 10-12 years down the line before, where there wasn't much competition in the market as well, it was driven by market, it was driven by a product philosophy.
Absolutely.
But these days people are more looking like service, as in if we are giving discounts, there's more market share. If the discount is dropped, the people just move on to something else. So as a philosophy, do you get a sense that the entire organization is moving towards building a product? I mean to say that it has got a lot of user thinking, it has got
Yes.
a lot of technology behind it and stuff like that. So how does that work?
Absolutely. We surely think ourselves as a product organization. The reason I say this is one of the first values that we established is consumer comes first. This is actually one of the first values of the company, right? In that order. By focusing on the consumer, inherently we bring human-centered approach to think through why we are building what we are building. We are always thinking about this human, their emotions, their needs and wants, and work backwards on what to build to solve some of their problems. And so the question runs really deeper into why would the user care about our product and not somebody else's product? How does it fit ergonomically into their lives? So much so that it solves a genuine problem, but it also delights them. How does it evolve to extend into their lives in a much more meaningful way every day? So, and if you look at this thinking, it can guide you naturally into other parts of how you build it also. And part of it is about like product discovery, which is figuring out what to build in the first place, right? Like now that the why is clear, what to build in the first place. And then once we do that, it trickles down to how should the product be experienced, in a seamless way, delightful way, friendly way, whatever that is, right? These principles.
What are the character of the product?
Yeah, what are the characteristics of the product? But if you think about it, it can guide you into going further down in how it needs to be positioned and marketed, so it builds an emotional bond with consumers. So you started with product discovery. What is the right product to build in the first place? That is the discovery phase of the product. And then you move down into actual development and then into actual marketing, right? Like, so it guides you throughout the process with humans in the center of things. And it could be applied at a very strategic level like this, and at a very tactical level, like, what is that UI? What is that experience that we want? It could even help us align on the right kind of partnerships to have, right kind of supply to have, and the right ops to make this end user experience magical.
Absolutely.
I've seen that evolve that at Swiggy, right? Like this is in most ways than not. And that's why I confidently say that we are a product thinking organization where user and is really at the center of things, right? Like, consumer is really at the center of things. We don't really call users because like we have three customers, right? Like, there's end consumer, and then there are vendors who are also our users, and then there are drivers who are also users. So just to be clear, we always call consumers, and at the end of the day, consumer wins.
Wow, that's brilliantly put. Srinath, just to conclude, what can we expect in the coming time from Swiggy, if you may share, at least in the design space, if you can?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of new product ideas that is going to come in. We are working on some couple of interesting things. I talked to you about like, how do we fit into consumers' life, and we are looking at more and more things, right? More and more meaningful things where we can fit in their lives. If you think about it, like Swiggy is known for convenience because of how predictable, how usable, how reliable the service is, how the product is. But I think that it could be much more, right? Like, this is one of the convenience that we could give. And there are other predictable needs of a consumer. Food is one of them. There's other needs like, probably grocery supplies or, any household supplies or any other convenience that we can give to consumers where it is meaningful. So we are really that convenience company who can make it happen. And when we do that, what we get out of it is something that we are excited about. And as a design team, it is this experience, right? Like, which is building this convenience ecosystem for the next Indian consumer, right? And there's more and more getting added, right? There's millions and millions of Indian consumers. If you think about it, their lives are going to get fairly complicated.
Correct.
And
they are already.
Yes, it's already, right? Like,
biggest is traffic.
Yes, biggest is traffic, of course. And there are a number of chores that are getting added. What if there is a way to outsource all of these chores and you take back your life? How would that experience be? Wow. What could you do with this, right? Like, when you suddenly have something where you just tap a button and 10 things happen and you can actually take back your life, and what could that product have an effect on the consumers? Probably it will inspire them to take a walk or, probably take their, play with their kids or actually during a party time, you actually party and then trying to figure out what to do. And so we really want to be that convenience company. And as a design team, we are super excited about building this next set of convenience products for our consumers, for Indian consumers.
Wow. You gave away perfect as much as it creates curiosity. And on that note, I would like to thank you again for giving us your time. And if people have to follow your work or Swiggy, what's the best way? It's do you have a blog sort of a thing?
We are building a design blog of sorts, but you can follow us on Twitter handle at Swiggy Design, and we are on Instagram in the same handle as well. And you can find all of the designers there.
I think you recently opened a Dribble account as well.
Yes, Dribble in the same idea as well, like at Swiggy Design.
All right. On that note, thanks, Srinath. Really, it was wonderful talking to you and got to learn a lot. And I'm hoping to do another episode, maybe covering other aspects of Swiggy, because there's so much to learn with this product that you're building. And all the best for your future plans with the product as well.
Thanks, Kedar. Thanks so much for inviting me to AudioGyan. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.